My lovely 80-year-old dad has been writing his life story as part of his legacy for our family. And in it, he talks about the time his grandmother had a ride from Winston Churchill on the back of Winston's motorbike. He talks about the time he found a live hand grenade, in the Second World War hand grenade, in the field behind where he lived, took it home, and then lost it, and to this day has no idea what happened to that hand grenade. And he talks about the crazy clerical error that resulted in having a long and happy career as a printer. And because his printing career really mattered to him, he also talks about the tiny microdots of ink that printers use to take anything that we can imagine and make it real on the printed page. And when I read that, I realized that there was an equivalent to those microdots of ink that we can all use to take anything we can imagine about a better world and make that real too. And it's that simple idea that I want to share with you. Now, back in 2015, every single civilized country in the world signed up for a set of 17 global goals through the United Nations. This painted a picture of this better world. But I want to make it a little bit simpler than that. Imagine that there were a set of global legacy scales where everything good that happens in the world is on the right-hand side of the global legacy scales, and everything bad that happens piles up on the left-hand side. And sometimes it feels like there's a lot more on the bad side than the good, doesn't it? But just imagine if there was a really simple way, not only of rebalancing those scales, but actually tipping them and tipping us all into a better future. And that's the simple idea I really want to share with you. What if we all decided and sat down and thought about the things that really matter to us in our lives, the good and bad things? And what if we treated them as one of my dad's micro dots of ink, as a trigger? And what if we decided that every time one of those things that happened, good or bad, we were going to use that as a trigger, and we were going to respond to that by making something good happen in the world? Another one of those tiny microdots, my dad's tiny microdots, an impact, a micro impact. So, for example, it might be that we plant a tree or we feed a child. What if every time something that mattered to us, that was good, we use that as an occasion to celebrate our good fortune, or to be grateful for it, or just to magnify it and amplify it by making something else good happen in the world? What else? What if, when bad things happened, we also used those as triggers, and we chose to put something good on the positive side of the global legacy scales, just because we can? Not necessarily to tackle the issue that made us unhappy in the first place, but just because we can, to start redressing the balance. Now, we love that idea so much because it changes everything, and I want to show you how we use it in our lives, in our families, and in our business, to try and help bring about this better world that I think most of us look forward to. We realized very quickly as a family that these things that we wanted to do, we didn't have the time or the opportunity or the skill to be there in person and make them happen. We couldn't fly to the other side of the world to a rainforest to plant a tree. That's just not practical. So we had to look for a new way of making these micro impacts, making these good things happen. And that's when we discovered the B1G1 Impact Initiative, because it essentially allows us to find and fund these acts of kindness, these tiny acts of kindness, and make them happen. It allows us to fund good things and for someone else to actually make them happen, to plant the tree, etc. And that changes everything. The simplicity and the ease of that changes everything. And it actually is surprisingly inexpensive too. It's many of these things that we want to see changing and getting better in the world cost just a few cents or pennies. So we try to use this as a family in 4 ways, and I want to share with you how we do that. Not because the way we do it is in any way perfect, but because hopefully it will help you see how you can perhaps take this idea and use it in your life, in your family, or in your workplace. So we use it in 4 ways. The first of those is that I try to live what I call a life for good. And that means that I've identified my triggers and that I always respond to them in a consistent way. For me, at my age, the ultimate good trigger, the ultimate good thing in my life is just waking up another day and enjoying another day of health and happiness. So I always respond first thing in the morning in exactly the same way. I always respond by making 17 good things happen. In fact, specifically, I fund 16 days of food, water, education, sanitation, and a plant a tree, so 17 things in total. There's nothing magical about 17. In fact, when I started, I just did one good thing a day. Just try to do one good thing a day. But now I do 17 because there are 17 global goals, and those really matter to me. And quite frankly, doing all 17 cost me less than the price of a small beer. So why wouldn't I do that? I also respond to lots of bad triggers, not just good things, but the bad things that happen around me. So, for example, I was in town the other day and I saw a drunken homeless person. I didn't want to feed their addiction, so I did what I always do. I went home and I funded 10 meals for 10 other homeless people, actually through a project that takes food from restaurants and recycles it and repurposes it and gives it to the homeless. That cost me less than the price of a cup of coffee. And many of the triggers and impacts that I use in my life are connected as that was. So, for example, every time my football team wins, which sadly isn't that often, but when they win, I respond by providing a day's worth of sports training for a disadvantaged youngster. There's a connection. Every time I read or see something about climate change that upsets me, and that is often, I plant another tree. And every time I enjoy a meal at a restaurant, I fund a meal for someone who would otherwise go hungry. There's a certain poetry and symmetry when there's a connection between your triggers and the impacts that you unleash in the world, but they don't have to be connected. The triggers can be anything you choose. I've got lots, you might just have one. The impacts that you connect them to can be anything you choose, whether it's related to the trigger or not. Just doing something good in the world. Whether it's a good thing that happens that matters to you or a bad thing, you can do that. The second way we use these ideas is as a family for good. Let me give you some examples. So our oldest daughter, when she qualified as a doctor after 10 years at medical school, this is what we gave her. Instead of a conventional good luck gift, you've provided 3,650 days of access to life-saving healthcare to people, 1 day of help for every day you've trained as a doctor. A few years later, when she got married, as we sat down to eat the wedding breakfast together, there was a little card on the place setting for each of us, and it said this: to thank you for your love and kindness, we've used B1G, and so that the 100 guests here today have given 100 children in India a healthy school meal so that they can make the most of their education. If they're hungry, they don't learn so well. And the 11 tables here, we were seated in 11 lovely tables, have made life better for 11 families in Cambodia, giving them clean water for a year and protected the planet by planting 11 trees in Borneo and training 11 Indonesian farmers in sustainable farming techniques. And then a few years later, when they had their first child, our first grandchild, in fact, the first gift we gave them was this: to spread some of our happiness around, since you were looked after in the hospital for 5 days, we said to our daughter, we've given 5 days of hospital care to 5 women in Kenya so that they can also have their babies in a safe and supportive environment. And then when our little grandson's great-grandfather, my dad, finished his life story book, this is what he wrote on the last page. As a final thank you for all the wonderful memories, love and kindness that have made up my life, Dad said, we've used our family's favourite charity, B1G1, to plant 80 mango trees in Kenya, 1 tree for each of the first 80 years of my story. Now, the wonderful thing about those mango trees is they yield an enormous amount of fruit, so that provides food for the family in Kenya. The surplus fruit is sold, provides income, and they sequester carbon. What a wonderful legacy. And those are just some examples. We have many other triggers that we use as a family, including birthdays, celebrations, moving house, exam success, retirement, the list goes on and on and on. And each of those unlocks something good in the world as a family. Imagine how it feels being part of that. The third way we use this very simple idea is at work. I run a business, so we run it as a business for good. We live a life for good, as part of a family for good, and we run it as a business for good. So that means that every time we sell something, we make something good happen in the world. Every time we win a new customer, we make something good happen. Every time we get a testimonial, we make something good happen. Every time we hit a target, we make something good happen. Imagine what that means. Imagine how it feels working in an environment where you know that just by doing what you normally do at work, you're making the world a better place at the same time. You're moving your career forward, you're moving the workplace forward, and you're moving our world forward. Just imagine. Just imagine what that does for your energy levels, what that does for your motivation, what those things mean for your productivity, what those things mean for the customer service experience, what that all means for the reputation of the business and its success. I mean, obviously, this is the right thing to do in a business context. So if you run a business, it's clearly the right thing. And if you work in one but you don't run it, why not share the idea with those who do run it, because it will obviously be the right thing for them to do too. And remember, the cost, the funding cost of doing these things is surprisingly small. For less than 10 US cents, you can fund a day or more, in fact, in many cases, many days' worth of grain that will grow into food, or vitamin A supplements that will prevent child blindness, or netting that prevents mosquitoes coming in and giving you malaria, or sanitation, or healthcare, or textbooks, or education, or medication. It's so surprisingly easy, so surprisingly inexpensive. The fourth way we use this is that we measure and go public with the impact. And as you can see from our website here, and we do that because we've discovered that when you can see the thousands and thousands of days of help that you've provided, and where that help lands in the world, and how it contributes to the UN global goals, it inspires us to do even more, to make even more good things happen in the world. And wonderfully, it seems to inspire other people to do that as well, just because we measure it and go public with it. Now, I find it amazing, surprising, constantly surprising that because we have many triggers in our lives, in our family, and in the business, and we've been doing this for 10 years, it actually adds up to extraordinarily, amazingly surprising numbers. There's literally millions. Now, you probably won't have anywhere near as many triggers, and your final number may well be much smaller than that. Wonderful. You will still be helping to tip the global legacy scales. You will still be making a difference. Together we can really do this. Each of those little micro triggers and micro impacts at a time. The really wonderful thing happens when we add one more element into the mix. And that one more element is people. Lots and lots and lots of people living a life for good as part of a family for good whilst working in a business for good. Because if we all identify our triggers and we all commit to linking those triggers to making good things happen in the world, and if enough people do that, every single one of us in fact, not only does it spell out TIP, T-I-P, but that's actually what it achieves. This isn't about random acts of kindness. This is about systematic acts of kindness. This is about building into your habits, your systems, your life, your business, your values, and letting them show up in a practical way. And just imagine if we all did that. It really would start to tip these global legacy scales, wouldn't it? And if we did this every day and linked it to all of our triggers, and more people saw us doing it and got inspired by seeing us doing it, it really would tip and tip and tip. And if we carried on doing this and more people followed, it would really start to tip us into a better world. It really would. My dad's book is part of his legacy for our family, and I've tried to share with you some of the ways that we're building on that legacy, trying to move it forward. The really important question is, what do you want your legacy to be? What's your legacy going to be? Because if you want your legacy to be one of making a difference and making the world a better place, then you absolutely must start by doing something small today. And not hide behind the excuse of I'll do something big tomorrow, because tomorrow never comes. Big is too difficult. There is only today. I guarantee that you really can start tipping the global legacy scales in the direction we all want to see. One micro trigger and one micro impact at a time. You really can. And I really hope you do. But before you start, one more thought. Of course, today, this material really matters to me, so it is a trigger for me. And last night, I planted 1,000 trees in response to that trigger. That was the micro impact. One tree on behalf of each and every one of you here today, and one tree for the rest of the first 1,000 people to watch this. So I want to say thank you so much for being here today. I want to say thank you so much for all the good things you've done already, including those trees. And I want to say a huge congratulations for everything else you're going to go and do. One micro trigger, one micro impact at a time to tip the global legacy scales. Thank you very much. Thank you.